Have you ever wondered if there's more to Jesus' parables than what you've been taught? What if these ancient stories weren't simply moral lessons or religious teachings, but encoded blueprints for transforming your mind and manifesting the life you truly desire? For centuries, we've approached these parables as quaint religious tales, simple stories meant to communicate spiritual truths to peasants and fishermen. But what if they were actually sophisticated mental technologies designed to reprogram your subconscious mind? What if each parable contained a precise formula for spiritual awakening that works regardless of your religious background or beliefs? Stay with me until the end, because the insight I'm about to share might completely transform how you understand not just these biblical teachings, but your entire existence. These parables aren't distant religious artifacts. They're mirrors reflecting your current mental state. Has this ever happened to you? You read or hear a story, and something in it resonates so deeply that you feel it's speaking directly to your situation. That's not coincidence. It's recognition of truth at a soul level. The truth is, every human being is living within a parable of their own making. Your entire life, with all its struggles, joys, challenges, and triumphs, is nothing more than an allegory of your ideas, convictions, fears, and expectations made manifest. Just as the sower in Jesus' parable plants seeds in the earth, you are constantly sowing thoughts in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind. And whatever you plant there inevitably grows and bears fruit in your external reality. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. What you're about to discover might surprise you, especially if you've only encountered these parables through traditional religious interpretation. Each of Jesus' parables contains a condensed formula, a spiritual law, a mental warning, and a promise of redemption. They aren't meant to be admired from a distance, but to be lived from within. Consider this. Jesus wasn't a popular preacher improvising stories to win affection. He was the ultimate master of human mental structure. His parables don't speak to your rational mind, but to the deeper levels of consciousness where destinies are determined. They bypass your conscious resistance and plant seeds of transformation directly into your subconscious. The kingdom of God that Jesus spoke about isn't a distant heaven you reach after death. It's a mental structure that activates when your thinking aligns with truth. These parables teach you precisely how to think in harmony with that truth, how to abandon limiting mental habits, and how to create a life of abundance, health, peace, and purpose. As we journey deeper into the metaphysical meaning of these timeless teachings, you'll begin to see that the path to transformation isn't about learning something new, but about remembering what your soul has always known. Let me show you something profound. These parables aren't just stories happening outside of you. They're precise reflections of what's occurring within you at this very moment. Think about it. When Jesus spoke of the prodigal son, he wasn't merely telling a tale about family reconciliation. He was revealing the journey your consciousness takes when it wanders from its divine center and then finds its way home again. These encoded messages function as keys, actual spiritual technologies, that when properly understood, unlock the mental prison you've inadvertently built through misguided ideas, limiting beliefs, and false identities. Your struggles, your sense of limitation, your feelings of separation from the divine, these aren't punishments or bad luck. They're the natural consequences of misunderstood spiritual laws. The real revelation here is understanding that Jesus wasn't what most people think. He wasn't a charismatic preacher improvising heartwarming stories to win followers. He was the ultimate master of human mental architecture, someone who understood perfectly how consciousness operates and how destinies are shaped by the thoughts we entertain in the deepest recesses of our minds. This understanding changes everything about how we approach these teachings. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed," he wasn't making a cute metaphor. He was explaining a precise spiritual law about how manifestation works, how the smallest correct thought, properly planted and nourished in consciousness, inevitably expands into visible reality. The journey of transformation begins when you realize that these parables are operating in you right now. The soil of your mind is currently receiving seeds. Some fall on the path and are immediately devoured by doubts and distractions. Others sprout quickly, but wither under the first sign of challenge because they haven't taken root in your deeper beliefs. Still, others are choked by the weeds of competing priorities and worldly concerns. But some, those planted in the good soil of a prepared, receptive consciousness, produce a harvest 30, 60, even 100 times what was sown. This isn't religious imagery. It's the science of mind, made accessible through symbol and story. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how each parable contains not just a description of mental states, but a precise formula for transcending them. These aren't just diagnostics, they're prescriptions for healing and awakening. The Good Samaritan, for instance, isn't just teaching compassion, it's revealing how the divided mind must be reconciled before true spiritual progress can occur. If these deeper perspectives on Jesus' parables resonated with you, hit that subscribe button to join our community of spiritual seekers exploring the metaphysical truths behind sacred teachings. What hidden truth within yourself is being illuminated as you hear these words? What inner journey is being revealed to you through these ancient codes? The parables are speaking directly to the part of you that knows, that remembers its divine heritage beyond all the noise and confusion of everyday thinking. If you're experiencing that moment of recognition, that sense that something long forgotten is being awakened in you, write "awakening now" in the comments below. I'd love to know who among you is feeling the stirrings of that deeper knowing. Let me reveal something that might shift your entire perspective on spiritual teachings. There is absolutely nothing innocent or merely decorative in Jesus' parables. Not a single phrase, not one character, not even the smallest detail was placed there by accident or for artistic embellishment. What appears on the surface as simple storytelling is actually an exact, active spiritual science operating through symbolism, a technology of transformation designed to reprogram the deepest layers of your consciousness. Think of these parables as spiritual algorithms, precise formulas that, when properly understood and applied, inevitably produce specific results in your life experience. The mustard seed, the leaven in bread, the hidden treasure. These aren't random metaphors. They're deliberate revelations of how mind and reality interact, how consciousness shapes experience, and how inner transformation leads to outer manifestation. This brings us to perhaps the most revolutionary insight of all. The kingdom of God that religions have traditionally placed after death in some distant heaven is actually a present reality, a mental structure that activates when your thinking aligns with spiritual truth. It's not somewhere you go, it's something you become aware of through a shift in perception. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is at hand," or "The kingdom of God is within you," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was making a literal statement about the nature of reality and consciousness. The divine reality isn't separated from you by death or distance. It's separated only by perception, by the limiting mental habits we've cultivated throughout our lives. The journey to awakening isn't about earning some future reward or escaping to another realm. It's about dismantling the false structures in consciousness that prevent you from experiencing the abundance, peace, health, and joy that are your birthright in this present moment. It's about learning to think in harmony with truth instead of in alignment with fear, lack, separation, and limitation. Consider the parable of the prodigal son. Most interpretations focus on God's forgiveness of sinners, but at a deeper level, it's revealing the journey of consciousness itself, how we separate from our divine source through misidentification, exhaust ourselves in illusory pursuits, and finally return through remembrance of our true nature. The Father didn't change during the Son's absence. It was the Son's perception and awareness that transformed. The revelation that awaits you is that these aren't ancient religious stories. They're maps of your own consciousness, blueprints for your awakening, codes that, once deciphered, unlock dormant capacities within you. Every internal obstacle you face, every limitation you experience, every pattern of struggle you encounter has been addressed in these teachings, not through platitudes, but through precise spiritual science. I'm going to reveal how these parables create an entire technology of mind, a systematic approach to reprogramming your consciousness from the ground up. The sower, the seeds, the soils, they're not just agricultural metaphors, but revelations about how ideas take root in consciousness and produce corresponding realities. If you're beginning to see these teachings in a completely new light, beyond religion and into the realm of consciousness science, type "seeing clearly" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are experiencing this perspective shift. One of the greatest barriers to experiencing the transformative power of these teachings has been our collective insistence on literal interpretation. For centuries, religious institutions have presented these parables as moral lessons, historical accounts, or theological concepts, missing entirely their function as practical technologies of consciousness. This literal approach has obscured their original purpose and power. Think about it. Countless seekers have read the parable of the Good Samaritan and walked away with the message, "Be kind to strangers." A worthy moral, certainly, but barely scratching the surface of its true significance. At a deeper level, this parable reveals how different aspects of your own consciousness respond to your wounded self, how religious conditioning often passes by your deepest needs, and how true healing comes from unexpected sources within your own being. The revelation that's waiting for you is this: everything you've been seeking externally, the validation, the security, the peace, the prosperity, the healing, was never meant to be found out there. These parables have always pointed to the kingdom within, to the power of your own transformed consciousness to manifest these realities from the inside out. Each parable offers precise instructions for reprogramming your subconscious mind, the soil in which all your life experiences take root and grow. When Jesus spoke of the sower, the soils, and the seeds, he wasn't just creating an agricultural metaphor, he was revealing exactly how thoughts become things, how beliefs become experiences, and how perception shapes reality. Consider the revolutionary implications of this perspective. What if the parable of the talents isn't about using your gifts wisely, but about how consciousness multiplies whatever you focus on with emotional intensity? What if the prodigal son isn't about forgiveness, but about the journey of the divided mind returning to wholeness? What if the pearl of great price isn't about valuing faith, but about recognizing your own divine nature as the only treasure worth pursuing? This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical mind science. When properly understood and applied, each parable becomes a blueprint for transformation, a code that reconfigures your mental and emotional patterns and ultimately redesigns your entire life experience from the foundation up. The ancients understood something we're only beginning to rediscover. Consciousness is primary, and the material world is its reflection. These parables weren't designed to change your behavior through moral instruction. They were designed to change your consciousness through symbolic reprogramming. And when consciousness shifts, everything else follows naturally. I'm going to guide you through a completely fresh understanding of these ancient teachings, one that bypasses religious dogma and speaks directly to the creative power within you. We'll explore how these parables, when properly decoded, offer a comprehensive system for manifesting health, abundance, meaningful relationships, and spiritual fulfillment. The journey we're on together isn't about adding more knowledge to your mind. It's about stripping away the illusions that have kept you from experiencing your divine inheritance. It's about clearing the mental pathways so that what has always been true about you can finally express itself without obstruction. If you're feeling that inner recognition, that sense that these words are awakening something that has always been within you, type "inner awakening" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are feeling that stirring of deeper truth as we continue this exploration. What makes this approach to the parables so revolutionary is that we're not examining them through the lens of doctrine, emotion, or theological debate. Instead, we're approaching them as a precise spiritual science of thought, a technology of consciousness that operates according to exact mental laws. Just as gravity functions whether you believe in it or not, these spiritual principles work consistently, regardless of your religious background or lack thereof. This shift from moral judgment to mental law changes everything. Traditional interpretations have often emphasized suffering, sacrifice, and the payment of spiritual debts. But these parables actually reveal something much more empowering. They offer keys to immediate transformation through the correct application of thought. They show how consciousness creates reality according to mathematical precision, not arbitrary reward or punishment. When Jesus spoke of the mustard seed, he wasn't delivering a sermon about faith. He was revealing the exponential power of a single thought held in consciousness without contradiction. When he described the leaven in bread, he wasn't just creating a memorable image. He was showing how a small shift in perception eventually transforms your entire mental field through an invisible but unstoppable process. The breakthrough moment comes when you realize that these parables aren't teaching you anything new. They're helping you remember what your soul has always known. The wisdom they contain isn't foreign to your being. It's the very structure of your spiritual DNA. That's why certain passages can trigger such profound recognition when you encounter them. It's not learning, it's remembering. These parables function as mirrors, reflecting back to you your own state of consciousness. When you read about the prodigal son and feel moved, it's because you recognize your own journey of separation and return. When the parable of the talents resonates with you, it's because you see your own patterns of multiplying or burying your spiritual gifts. The teaching is simply a lamp that illuminates what was already there within you, waiting to be seen clearly. This is why traditional study often falls short. You can memorize these stories word for word and still miss their transformative power if you approach them only intellectually. True engagement with these teachings is not about accumulating knowledge. It's about allowing them to catalyze an awakening of what was always present, but hidden beneath layers of conditioned thinking. I'm going to show you how to use these parables as practical tools for transformation, not as religious doctrines to believe in, but as mirrors to see yourself more clearly and catalysts to awaken dormant aspects of your consciousness. We'll explore how each story contains a specific frequency that, when properly understood, attunes your mind to higher possibilities and dissolves the mental barriers you've constructed. The hidden revelation here is that these parables are actually codes, specific vibrational patterns that, when properly understood, recalibrate your entire being to its original divine blueprint. They're not just stories. They're spiritual technologies designed to restore your consciousness to its natural state of abundance, wholeness, and creative power. If you're feeling that deep inner recognition, that sense that we're discussing something your soul already knows but your mind has forgotten, type soul remembering in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are experiencing that profound sense of remembering rather than learning something new. Now let's explore what might be the most foundational of all Jesus's parables, the one that unlocks the mechanism behind all manifestation in your life. The parable of the sower reveals a truth so profound, yet so simple, that most people miss its revolutionary implications. Everything that happens in your life, without exception, results directly from what you've sown in your mind. There are no accidents, no random events, no strokes of luck or misfortune that aren't connected to your mental activity. This isn't religious dogma or New Age philosophy. It's the fundamental operating system of human consciousness. Your thoughts are not passive reflections of reality. They are active, creative forces that shape the very fabric of your experience. This parable reveals that your mind is a field, and every thought you entertain is a seed planted in that field. These seeds don't disappear. They germinate, take root, and eventually produce a harvest that becomes your life circumstances. The radical revelation here is that nothing in your experience is arbitrary. If you're experiencing limitation, conflict, or lack, it's because such conditions have been sown, nurtured, and cultivated in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind. And if you're experiencing abundance, harmony, and fulfillment, it's because those qualities have been similarly planted and nourished. What makes this teaching so transformative is that it establishes the absolute law of the subconscious. Every thought accepted in your subconscious mind produces an equivalent result in your external life. This isn't a religious belief, it's a spiritual technology that operates with mathematical precision whether you're aware of it or not. Just as gravity doesn't require your belief to function, this law works consistently regardless of your conscious awareness. Think about the implications of this revelation. It means that nothing is happening to you. Everything is happening through you and because of you. It means that you're not a victim of circumstances, but a creator of conditions. It means that by changing the seeds you plant, the thoughts you consistently hold in mind, you inevitably change the harvest you experience. The sower in this parable represents your conscious mind, the part of you that chooses what to focus on, what to affirm, what to imagine, and what to believe. The soil represents your subconscious, the deeper level of mind that accepts whatever is planted and brings it into manifestation without judgment. The seeds are your thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and expectations. And the harvest is your lived experience, your health, your relationships, your material circumstances, your entire life. The revolutionary insight that emerges from this understanding is that transformation doesn't require changing anything in the external world. It requires changing what you're sowing internally. When you shift your thought patterns from fear to faith, from lack to abundance, from conflict to peace, the outer conditions must change accordingly, not as a reward, but as an expression of mental law. I'm going to reveal how this principle operates in specific areas of your life, how thought patterns create health conditions, how mental seeds produce financial circumstances, how internal beliefs shape relationship experiences. The connections are precise and predictable once you understand the science behind this parable. If you've already noticed this principle operating in your own life, if you've seen how your dominant thoughts eventually materialize in your experience, share that insight by typing "thought harvest" in the comments. I'd love to hear about the connections you're already observing between your inner sowing and your outer reaping. What makes the parable of the sower particularly illuminating is that Jesus didn't just tell us that our thoughts create our reality. He precisely mapped out the different mental states that determine whether a spiritual truth will flourish or fail in our consciousness. These aren't just agricultural metaphors, they're exact descriptions of how your mind processes ideas and transforms them into experience. The first mental state Jesus identified is what he called the path, representing the distracted mind. This is consciousness that's been trampled down by constant external stimulation, endless notifications, social media scrolling, and the relentless pace of modern life. When spiritual truth falls on this mental terrain, it doesn't even penetrate the surface. The birds, symbolic of passing thoughts, doubts, and distractions, immediately snatch it away. Have you noticed how a profound insight can come to you in the morning, only to be completely forgotten by noon, because your mind is so overrun with external demands? The second state is the rocky ground, the enthusiastic but shallow mind. This is the consciousness that gets excited about new spiritual ideas, declares them on social media, perhaps even buys books and attends workshops, but hasn't done the deeper work of removing the stones of fear, resentment, and judgment. Without depth, the roots can't establish, and when the inevitable challenges come, what Jesus called the heat of the sun, the initial enthusiasm withers. This explains why so many people experience short-lived transformations that don't endure. The third mental state is the thorny ground, the mind full of competing concerns. This is perhaps the most common condition in our culture. The person who genuinely believes in spiritual principles but simultaneously remains governed by fear of others' opinions, addiction to drama, excessive material concerns, and social comparison. In this divided consciousness, spiritual truth does germinate but becomes choked. The person prays but doubts, affirms but complains, visualizes but criticizes. The result is a tepid, inconsistent experience, partial manifestation followed by setbacks. But there's a fourth mental state, the good soil, that represents deep, fertile consciousness. This isn't something you're born with, it's something you cultivate. The good soil is a mind that has learned to set aside time for silence, that has practiced forgiveness, that has systematically unlearned fear, that vigilantly monitors thoughts and corrects them when they stray from truth. In this prepared consciousness, spiritual principles don't just survive, they thrive exponentially, producing harvests of 30, 60, even 100 times what was planted. This revelation transforms spiritual practice from vague hoping to precise mental gardening. The multiplication factor Jesus mentioned isn't symbolic. It's a literal description of how a single thought, properly planted in fertile consciousness, expands into manifold expressions of abundance, health, peace, and fulfillment. A single idea about prosperity, when accepted in the good soil of a prepared mind, can manifest as multiple unexpected income streams. One realization about your inherent wholeness can heal various physical conditions simultaneously. The journey of transformation then begins with honest soil assessment. Before planting more affirmations or declarations, we must ask, what kind of mental terrain am I working with? Have I allowed my consciousness to become trampled by constant distraction? Are there stones of resentment I need to remove, thorns of competing priorities I need to address? If you've realized which type of mental soil you're currently working with, share your insight by typing soil awareness in the comments. The recognition itself is the first step toward transformation. Now, I want to illuminate what may be the most powerful revelation in all spiritual teaching. The subconscious law is absolute. What you sow, you reap, without exception, without favoritism, without randomness. This isn't a religious belief or a moral platitude. It's the fundamental operating principle of consciousness itself, as precise and unwavering as any law of physics. This understanding completely transforms your relationship with your own thoughts. When you sow hatred through judgment, criticism, or condemnation, you inevitably reap conflict in your experience. This manifests not as punishment, but as the natural expression of mental law. When you sow fear through worry, anxiety, or catastrophic thinking, you reap conditions of lack and limitation. When you sow guilt, you reap experiences that feel like punishment. These connections aren't philosophical, they're functional aspects of how consciousness creates reality. The revolutionary breakthrough comes when you realize that the opposite is equally true. When you sow love through compassion, understanding, and acceptance, you reap harmonious conditions. When you sow gratitude, you reap experiences that evoke more gratitude. When you sow peace, you reap circumstances that reflect tranquility. This isn't magic or mysticism, it's the precise operation of mental law that Jesus encoded in his teachings. But there's a crucial distinction between intellectually understanding this principle and actually implementing it effectively. Sowing ideas in the subconscious isn't like planting physical seeds. It requires specific conditions, repetition with faith, emotional intensity, and concentrated attention. The subconscious doesn't respond to casual thoughts or half-hearted declarations. It responds to what is impressed upon it with conviction, feeling, and persistence. Subscribe to continue this journey of spiritual awakening with us as we uncover the hidden codes and transformative wisdom in teachings that have been misunderstood for centuries. This is where the real inner work begins, the technology of transformation that most spiritual seekers miss. Scientific prayer isn't begging an external deity for favors, it's the systematic impressing of truth upon your own subconscious mind. Meditation isn't just stress relief, it's creating the mental receptivity necessary for new ideas to take root. Visualization isn't daydreaming, it's programming your inner creative faculty with precise images that it then works to materialize. But here's the revelation that changes everything. None of these techniques work effectively if the terrain isn't prepared first. You cannot plant prosperity in a mind cluttered with thoughts of scarcity. You cannot sow health in consciousness dominated by fear. You cannot cultivate peace in a mental environment filled with judgment. The preparation of the soil precedes the planting of the seed. This explains why many spiritual practices seem to work for some people and not for others. The difference isn't in the technique itself, but in the condition of the consciousness using it. A single affirmation of abundance, planted in properly prepared mental soil, can produce greater results than thousands of affirmations scattered on unprepared ground. The key isn't quantity of spiritual activity, but quality of mental receptivity. The journey of transformation requires honest assessment of what you've been unconsciously sowing. Your current life circumstances, in precise detail, reflect what you've been planting, not just through deliberate practice, but through habitual thinking, emotional patterns, and unconscious beliefs. Every thought is a seed, every emotion is water, every belief is fertilizer. If you've had a breakthrough realization about what you've been unconsciously sowing in your mental garden, share your insight by typing "seed awareness" in the comments. Understanding what we've been planting is the first step to changing the harvest. Here's where many spiritual seekers encounter their first significant obstacle: the misconception that transformation happens through emotional intensity, inspirational phrases, or extraordinary spiritual experiences. The truth is far more practical and in some ways more demanding. The subconscious mind, that powerful creative center that shapes your reality, isn't reprogrammed through emotion alone, however genuine. It isn't transformed by beautiful affirmations, however eloquent, and it isn't permanently altered by peak experiences, however profound. The subconscious is reprogrammed through one thing above all else: persistence, mental discipline, daily, consistent practice that may lack drama, but creates lasting change. This isn't the message most spiritual teachers emphasize because it doesn't sell as well as promises of instant transformation, but it's the hidden truth behind every authentic spiritual breakthrough in human history. Think about learning any skill, from playing piano to mastering a sport. You don't transform your ability through a single day of passionate practice or by repeating nice phrases about your talent. You change through showing up day after day, making small adjustments, correcting errors, reinforcing patterns until they become second nature. Spiritual transformation works according to the same principle. The mind isn't reprogrammed through intensity, but through consistency. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood parables Jesus ever taught, the wheat and tares. This teaching addresses a phenomenon that confuses countless spiritual seekers. Even when genuine spiritual growth has begun, both positive and negative results often coexist in your experience. You're praying, meditating, affirming truth, doing everything right, yet still encountering challenges, limitations, or conflicts that seem to contradict your spiritual work. In this parable, Jesus explains that wheat, positive manifestations, and tares, negative manifestations, grow together in the same field, your she consciousness, for a period. This isn't a sign of failure, it's a natural phase in the transformation process. The tares represent old thought patterns, unconscious beliefs, and mental habits sown before your spiritual awakening. They continue producing effects even as your new understanding begins creating different results. The revolutionary insight here is that this coexistence doesn't invalidate your spiritual practice. Many abandon their path precisely at this critical juncture, assuming that the presence of difficulties proves their spiritual work is ineffective. But Jesus is teaching exactly the opposite. The mixed harvest is evidence that transformation is underway, not that it has failed. Think of it as mental momentum. Just as a large ship doesn't instantly change direction when the wheel turns, your consciousness doesn't immediately manifest only positive conditions when you begin thinking truthfully. There's a period where old thought harvests are still appearing even as new ones begin to emerge. Understanding this principle prevents the discouragement that derails countless spiritual journeys. What makes this teaching particularly profound is Jesus' instruction about how to handle this phase. He doesn't suggest fighting against negative manifestations or becoming desperate to eliminate them. Instead, he counsels patience, continued focus on truth, and trust in the natural unfolding of spiritual law. The tares will be gathered in their time without uprooting the wheat. The negative manifestations will naturally fade as the new consciousness strengthens. If you've experienced this phenomenon, seeing both positive changes and persistent challenges simultaneously in your spiritual journey, share your experience by typing wheat and tares in the comments. This recognition itself can be the difference between abandoning your path and persevering through this natural phase of growth. The revelation that makes this parable so transformative lies in understanding what it means for wheat and tares to grow together in the same field. This isn't just an agricultural metaphor. It's a precise description of how your consciousness operates during spiritual growth. In your human experience, correct and erroneous thoughts literally coexist simultaneously. Divine understanding and limited perception occupy the same mental space. Truthful awareness and false beliefs share the same consciousness. This coexistence explains one of the most perplexing aspects of the spiritual journey: why you can experience profound insights and still face recurring limitations, why you can pray with conviction and still encounter struggle, why you can know the truth intellectually and still act from fear practically. You're witnessing the wheat and tares growing together in your mental field. What's happening in this phase is a natural transition of consciousness. Just as a room doesn't immediately warm up when you turn on the heat, Your life experience doesn't instantly transform when you begin thinking differently. There's a period of overlap, a time when the new consciousness is taking root, even while the old consciousness is still producing effects. The tares in this parable represent something very specific. They're the old beliefs, unconscious mental habits, and erroneous thoughts you've entertained and accepted before your spiritual awakening. They represent your mental past, still producing effects in your present experience. Think of them as the momentum of previous thinking still playing out in your life circumstances. These tares weren't planted by some external evil force. They were sown by your own unconscious acceptance of limiting ideas. Perhaps you absorbed beliefs about lack from your family environment. Maybe you internalized messages about unworthiness from cultural conditioning. Perhaps you accepted ideas about struggle and difficulty as necessary parts of life. These seeds were planted in your mental field long before you awaken to spiritual truth, but they continue growing alongside your new understanding. The profound insight here is that this coexistence doesn't invalidate your spiritual practice. It confirms it. The very fact that you can now distinguish between wheat and tares, between truth and illusion in your consciousness, is evidence of your growth. Before awakening, you couldn't even recognize the difference. Now you can see both operating simultaneously, which is the first step toward transformation. What's truly revolutionary about this teaching is that it liberates you from the perfectionism that derails so many spiritual seekers. You don't need to create a consciousness totally free of tares before experiencing any wheat. You don't need to eradicate every limiting belief before manifesting any good. The process is gradual, organic, and allows for both to exist during the transition phase. This understanding transforms your relationship with your own development. Instead of becoming discouraged by the presence of challenges, you can recognize them as tares, old thought patterns still manifesting, while continuing to nurture the wheat of your new consciousness. The tares don't disprove the wheat. They simply show you're in a natural phase of mental transition. If you've experienced this phenomenon, recognizing both spiritual truth and limiting beliefs operating in your consciousness simultaneously, share your insight by typing mental transition in the comments. This awareness itself is a crucial milestone in your development. Now, I want to reveal one of the most profound spiritual insights encoded in this parable, a perspective that completely transforms how you engage with the challenges in your life. Mental discrimination facing appearances means developing the capacity to recognize that what appears as evil has no actual substance. It only has appearance. And that appearance only holds power if you accept it as real. This isn't positive thinking or denial of difficulties. It's a radical recognition that what we perceive as negative conditions, limitations, or problems don't have independent reality. They're manifestations of consciousness, expressions of thought energy that appear substantial but lack the power of truth. The apparent solidity of your challenges is an illusion created by your own acceptance of them as real. Think about how this revolutionizes your approach to life's difficulties. When you see a challenging circumstance not as a solid reality, but as a passing appearance, a manifestation of previous thought, you relate to it completely differently. You don't fight against it. You don't energize it with fear or resistance. And most importantly, you don't accept it as having power over your spiritual identity. Jesus teaches something counterintuitive in this parable. He doesn't advise immediately trying to pull up the tares. Instead, he counsels letting both grow together until the harvest. This harvest isn't a future event in time. It's the moment when your consciousness has matured enough to clearly distinguish between truth and illusion, when you've acquired enough inner mastery to observe without reacting, to witness without judgment. This patience isn't passive acceptance of negative conditions, it's strategic spiritual wisdom. Premature attempts to force change often create more resistance and entrench the very patterns you're trying to transform. The spiritual breakthrough comes not from struggling against appearances, but from cultivating the consciousness that naturally dissolves them. The harvest represents a level of spiritual maturity where you can stand in your truth regardless of appearances. It's when you've developed sufficient inner stability that external conditions no longer dictate your state of mind. From this vantage point, you can observe both the wheat and tares in your experience without being defined by either. This is the freedom that Jesus points to, not freedom from challenging circumstances, but freedom from being controlled by them. What makes this teaching so practical is that it liberates you from the exhausting cycle of fighting against your current reality. Instead, it directs your energy toward nurturing the truth in consciousness, knowing that as your awareness strengthens, the appearance of limitation naturally loses its grip. The tares don't need to be attacked. They simply need to be recognized for what they are: temporary appearances without substance or permanence. This mental discrimination becomes your greatest power. When faced with illness, you recognize the appearance without accepting it as defining truth. When confronted with financial limitation, you acknowledge the condition while holding firm to the reality of abundance. When experiencing relationship conflict, you see the pattern without allowing it to determine your response. If you've experienced moments where you could clearly distinguish between the appearance of a situation and its spiritual reality, where you could see beyond the tares to the truth they couldn't obscure, share your breakthrough by typing "seeing beyond appearances" in the comments. This capacity for spiritual discernment is the foundation of genuine transformation. One of the most liberating revelations in this parable is understanding that the kingdom of God, that state of harmony, abundance, and spiritual alignment, isn't an immediate result, but a process of progressive purification. Many seekers abandon their path because they expect instant, complete transformation. They begin meditating, praying, or studying spiritual principles and become discouraged when their entire life doesn't transform overnight. This expectation of immediate results is one of the most persistent obstacles on the spiritual journey. The truth is that consciousness evolves through stages, through cycles of recognition and release, through periods of growth and integration. Just as a garden doesn't yield its harvest the day after planting, your consciousness doesn't manifest its full potential immediately after encountering truth. During this process of purification, the tares naturally manifest in your experience. And this is crucial, they don't appear as punishment or failure. They manifest to be observed, understood, and discarded without violence. Each challenge, each limitation, each apparent setback contains a message, a pattern to be recognized, a belief to be examined. These manifestations aren't obstacles to your development, they're essential components of it. If you found value in this metaphysical interpretation of Jesus' parables, tap that like button to help these consciousness-expanding insights reach others who are ready for deeper understanding. Think about how this transforms your relationship with difficulties. When you understand that challenges aren't random accidents, but meaningful revelations of what needs to be healed in consciousness, you stop resisting them and start learning from them. You recognize that what appears as a problem is actually part of the solution, the bringing to light of what was hidden in your consciousness so it can be released. Now let's explore a profound insight about how these tares enter your consciousness in the first place. The parable says, "They were sown while men slept," a metaphorical description that precisely identifies the root cause of all limitation: lack of attention and mental vigilance. This sleep represents those moments when you're not consciously monitoring what enters your mental field, when you're operating on autopilot, when you're absorbing ideas without discrimination. Spiritual vigilance, then, becomes one of your most essential practices. It consists of observing what you think, what you believe, what you repeat to yourself in moments of stress or challenge. It means becoming aware of the mental content you're exposing yourself to through media, conversations, and entertainment. It means recognizing how your environment influences your thought patterns and making conscious choices about what you allow into your mental space. This vigilance isn't about perfection or rigid control. It's about developing awareness of the seeds being planted in your consciousness. Every time you catch yourself in a negative thought pattern and consciously redirect your attention, you're practicing spiritual vigilance. Every time you question a limiting belief instead of automatically accepting it, you're awakening from the sleep that allows tares to be sown. The journey toward manifesting the kingdom isn't about forcing change through willpower. It's about cultivating awareness that naturally leads to better choices, clearer perception, and aligned action. As your vigilance increases, fewer tares are sown. As your discernment sharpens, existing tares lose their power to influence your experience. If you've noticed how periods of mental sleep or autopilot living have allowed limiting ideas to take root in your consciousness, share your realization by typing "awakening to vigilance" in the comments. This awareness itself is the beginning of transformation. Now, I want to take you even deeper into what may be the most revolutionary parable Jesus ever shared. One that completely transforms how you understand your spiritual journey and your very existence. Most human beings walk through life exactly like people inhabiting sacred ground without knowing it. They live as spiritual paupers, struggling, striving, feeling limited and small, while a tremendous power sleeps just beneath their feet, untapped and undiscovered. Imagine living your entire life on top of a vast oil reserve worth billions, yet working multiple jobs just to pay your bills. Or picture yourself wearing clothes lined with diamonds, completely unaware of the wealth you're carrying. This is precisely the human condition that Jesus addressed in the parable of the hidden treasure, the profound disconnection from our own divine potential. What makes this teaching so revolutionary is the revelation that the field is your mind and the treasure is your divine potential. It's not something external to acquire, it's something internal to discover. It's not a reward to earn, it's an inheritance to claim. This treasure represents all the qualities of the divine: abundance, peace, creativity, love, wholeness, already present within your consciousness, waiting to be recognized. The moment of discovery in this parable represents that first conscious glimpse of your inner Christ, that flash of insight when you realize that what you've been seeking outside yourself has been within you all along. It might come during meditation, through a profound challenge, or in an unexpected moment of clarity. Suddenly, you catch a glimpse of something magnificent within your own being, a power, a presence, a potential that transcends all your previous limitations. But notice what happens next in the parable. The man hides the treasure again and sells everything to buy the field. This seemingly strange action contains profound wisdom. It shows that merely glimpsing your divine potential isn't enough. You must make a total commitment to the spiritual process. Selling everything symbolizes the willingness to release whatever doesn't serve your spiritual awakening. Limiting beliefs, destructive habits, attachments to outcomes, identifications with the past. This commitment isn't a sacrifice in the conventional sense. The man in the parable acts with joy because he recognizes the immeasurable value of what he's discovered. When you truly glimpse the treasure of your divine nature, releasing what doesn't align with it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like liberation. You're not giving up treasures. You're discarding burdens that have been masquerading as treasures. The revolutionary message here completely inverts conventional spiritual seeking. You're not on a journey to become something you're not. You're on a journey to uncover what you've always been. You're not working to earn divine favor. You're removing the mental barriers that have prevented you from experiencing your divine inheritance. The field doesn't need to be created. It only needs to be purchased, claimed as your own through conscious decision and consistent practice. If you've experienced that moment of recognition, that glimpse of something within you that transcends all your perceived limitations and problems, share your experience by typing "treasure glimpsed" in the comments. That recognition, however brief, was not imagination, but the first sighting of your true spiritual inheritance. What's particularly fascinating about this spiritual awakening process is how it often begins. Many of us imagine that enlightenment comes to those who have studied the most, meditated the longest, or performed the most spiritual practices. Yet the reality reveals a much more accessible truth. Many times, awakening begins with a crisis, a burning question, or a nameless search that won't let you rest. It's rarely produced by intellectual effort or scholarly study, but by the soul's yearning, that indefinable longing that something more must exist beyond our current understanding. Think about the moments in your own life when you felt most spiritually alive. Was it while reading about spirituality, or was it during a profound challenge that forced you to look deeper? Was it during comfortable times, or was it when your familiar structures were shaken? For many, the treasure is first glimpsed not on the mountaintop of achievement, but in the valley of difficulty, not in certainty, but in questioning. This is why authentic spiritual transformation often begins at unexpected moments, through a loss that opens you to greater depth, through a question that conventional wisdom can't answer, through a yearning that material success can't satisfy. The soul speaks most clearly when our usual distractions are stripped away, when our familiar patterns are disrupted, when we're forced to look beyond our habitual responses to life. But there's another profound revelation in this parable that's often overlooked. After finding the treasure, the man hides it again before going to purchase the field. This seemingly strange action reveals a crucial spiritual principle. There's an internal transformation phase that must occur before external manifestation. The treasure isn't immediately displayed to the world. It's first embodied within consciousness. This hidden phase represents the inner work that precedes outward expression. It's the period of integration when your insight becomes your identity, when your glimpse becomes your foundation. During this time, you're not performing or proving your spirituality to others. You're allowing the truth to take root in your being. The treasure isn't something you possess as an object. It's something you become through embodiment. Many spiritual seekers make the mistake of trying to demonstrate or display their awakening before it's been fully integrated. They speak about insights they haven't embodied, share teachings they haven't lived, or try to manifest outer conditions before establishing the inner foundation. But the parable shows a different path, the wisdom of internal cultivation before external demonstration. This explains why the most profound spiritual transformations often happen quietly, almost invisibly at first. Like a seed germinating underground, the most important changes occur beneath the surface of your consciousness before they become visible in your circumstances. The treasure must be hidden, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for the natural process of embodiment that allows truth to become living experience rather than conceptual knowledge. If you've experienced this phenomenon, finding your deepest spiritual insights not through study but through life's challenges, or recognizing the importance of private integration before public expression, share your journey by typing "hidden transformation" in the comments. These less visible aspects of awakening are often the most significant. Now, I want to reveal what may be the most revolutionary aspect of Jesus' teaching, something that completely transforms how we understand spirituality itself. The kingdom of heaven isn't a place that you travel to after death. It isn't a future reward for good behavior. It isn't even another dimension that exists separately from your current experience. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, a way of perceiving and engaging with reality that's available right now in this moment, hidden within you, waiting to be revealed. This insight changes everything. It shifts the entire spiritual journey from a quest to get somewhere else to an awakening to what already is. It transforms religion from a system of earning future rewards to a process of present revelation. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is at hand," he wasn't making a prediction about an imminent apocalyptic event. He was describing an immediate psychological reality that transcends time altogether. Think about the implications of this understanding. If the kingdom is a state of consciousness rather than a location, then spiritual practice isn't about securing a better position in the afterlife. It's about awakening to the divine reality that's already present but hidden from your awareness by layers of conditioning. It's not about accumulating enough merit to earn entrance to a gated community in the sky. It's about removing the mental barriers that prevent you from experiencing the fullness of divine reality right where you are. This brings us to one of Jesus' most profound teachings, the parable of the pearl of great price, which addresses the fundamental misconception that keeps most people separated from this kingdom consciousness. Most human beings spend their entire lives identifying with temporary aspects of their experience, their name, their personal history, their physical body, their emotional states, their wounds and traumas, their achievements and mistakes. This mistaken identity keeps them alienated from their spiritual origin. It's like an actor who has played the same role for so long that they've forgotten their acting. They believe they are the character, limited, invulnerable, defined by the script. They've forgotten their true identity beyond the role. This is precisely the human condition that Jesus addressed. We've become so thoroughly identified with our temporary human experience that we've forgotten our divine nature. The merchant in this parable represents the awakening soul, someone who recognizes that something essential is missing and has begun consciously searching for it. Unlike the man who stumbles upon the treasure by accident, this merchant is actively seeking something of value. This represents a more mature phase of the spiritual journey, not just crisis-driven awakening, but deliberate seeking. And what does this merchant find? A pearl of great price, representing your true identity, your divine nature, the Christ consciousness that is your spiritual DNA. This pearl isn't something foreign to you that needs to be acquired. It's your authentic self that needs to be recognized beneath layers of false identification. It's not an achievement but a revelation, not an addition but a reclamation. If you've experienced moments where you sensed that your true identity is far more vast and magnificent than the limited self you usually identify with, share that glimpse by typing "true self glimpsed" in the comments. Those moments of expanded identity aren't imagination. They're brief recognitions of who you really are. Let me reveal what this pearl truly represents in the deepest metaphysical understanding. The pearl isn't just a symbol of something valuable. It specifically represents your true identity of being, the Christ within you, the I am presence that constitutes your essential nature. And critically, this isn't meant as a theological concept to be debated intellectually or accepted on faith. It's pointing to an actual inner experience, the consciousness of unity with God that transcends all conceptual understanding. This pearl of great price is the recognition that you are not separate from the divine, not a fragment hoping to reconnect, not a sinner seeking redemption, not a creature apart from the Creator. It's the direct experience of your oneness with the source of all being. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't claiming a unique status unavailable to others. He was demonstrating the realized state of consciousness that is every human's birthright. Think about how radically this transforms the spiritual journey. You're not working to become something you're not. You're not struggling to earn divine favor. You're not trying to add something to yourself that's currently missing. You're simply recognizing what has always been true, your essential divine nature that has been obscured by layers of false identification and limiting beliefs. Now I want to go even deeper into the profound distinction between this parable and the hidden treasure we explored earlier. Unlike the treasure's accidental discovery, the merchant seeking the pearl represents conscious, spiritual search. This difference is significant because it reveals two distinct paths to awakening: the unexpected breakthrough and the deliberate quest. The merchant symbolizes someone who has dedicated their life to seeking value, someone who recognizes that conventional pursuits don't satisfy the deepest yearning of the soul and has therefore embarked on a conscious journey of discovery. This represents a more mature phase of spiritual development where awakening isn't just a response to crisis, but a deliberate choice. Notice that the merchant isn't described as seeking religious doctrine, theological arguments, or spiritual experiences. He's seeking good pearls, representations of authentic value. This distinction matters because many seekers get distracted by spiritual phenomena, mystical experiences, or theological constructs rather than pursuing the one thing that matters, the recognition of their true identity. What makes this parable so powerful is the merchant's decisive action. When he finds the pearl of great price, he sells everything else to acquire it. This isn't about material renunciation, it's about the willingness to release every false identity, every limiting belief, every conceptual framework that no longer serves the recognition of your divine nature. You cannot simultaneously hold on to your limited self-concept and embrace your unlimited divine identity. The revelation of your true nature as the Christ consciousness, as the individualized expression of the divine, requires letting go of how you've defined yourself until now, not because those identifications were bad, but because they were incomplete. Just as a child must release their limited self-concept to embrace adult capacities, the awakening soul must release its identification with the personal self to embrace its divine nature. If you've experienced moments when you sensed that your true identity extends far beyond the name, form, and personal history you usually identify with, share that recognition by typing "identity expanding" in the comments. Those glimpses of your larger self are the pearl beginning to reveal itself in your awareness. Now I want to reveal what it truly means to live from the inner Christ, a state of consciousness that completely transforms how you engage with every aspect of your existence. When you awaken to your true identity, you no longer experience yourself as a victim of your past circumstances or as a lost creature, struggling to find meaning in an indifferent universe. Instead, you recognize yourself as an extension of divine love, a living manifestation of spiritual principle expressing itself uniquely through your individual life. This shift in self-perception changes everything. Problems don't disappear magically, but your relationship to them transforms fundamentally. Challenges become opportunities for greater expression rather than obstacles to happiness. Relationships become contexts for sharing your divine nature rather than sources of validation or security. Work becomes a channel for creativity rather than merely a means of survival. Your entire life becomes an opportunity to express the divine qualities that constitute your true identity. Living from the inner Christ doesn't make you special or superior to others. It simply aligns you with the truth of who you've always been, beneath the accumulated layers of false identification. It's not about achieving an elevated status. It's about remembering your original nature and allowing it to express through you without obstruction. This remembrance is natural, not supernatural, a return to authentic being rather than an escape from humanity. This brings us to what might be Jesus' most beloved parable, the story of the prodigal son, which reveals the universal cycle of deviation and return that every consciousness experiences. This isn't just a moral tale about repentance. It's a precise description of the pendulum movement between ignorance and wisdom, apparent separation and inner reunification that characterizes the spiritual journey. Every conscious being, without exception, goes through this cycle. There's a phase where we exercise our divine gift of free will to explore separation, to experience ourselves as independent entities apart from our source. This isn't a sin or mistake in the conventional sense. It's a necessary phase of self-discovery. Just as adolescents must temporarily separate from parents to discover their individuality, the soul must experience apparent separation from God to recognize its divine nature through contrast. The younger son requesting his inheritance and traveling to a far country represents consciousness moving away from its center, forgetting its divine origin, and identifying exclusively with the external world of form and sensation. This journey isn't a moral failure. It's a phase of experiential learning. The squandering of the inheritance represents how we misuse our divine creative power when we're operating from a sense of separation, trying to fill an inner emptiness with external experiences. The famine in the land isn't divine punishment, but the natural emptiness that follows when consciousness seeks fulfillment solely through external circumstances. Eventually, every soul reaches this point of spiritual hunger where nothing in the external world satisfies the deepest yearning for meaning, connection, and wholeness. This is the pivotal moment in the journey, what the parable calls coming to himself, when awareness begins to turn back toward its source. If you recognize this pattern in your own life, periods of seeking fulfillment externally followed by a growing recognition that what you really hunger for can only be found within, share your experience by typing "Journey Home" in the comments. This cycle of deviation and return isn't failure. It's the very path through which you discover who you truly are. What reveals one of the most profound spiritual truths in the prodigal son parable is how the father responds to the son's decision to leave. Notice this revolutionary detail. The father doesn't prevent the son from departing. He doesn't manipulate circumstances to keep him home. He doesn't punish, threaten, or guilt the son into staying. Instead, he honors the son's decision completely, giving him his full inheritance and allowing him to journey as far away as he chooses. This aspect of the parable unveils a fundamental spiritual law that transforms how we understand our relationship with the divine, the absolute law of free will. The Father, representing divine consciousness, never overrides your choices, never interferes with your decisions, never manipulates your circumstances to force compliance with some predetermined plan. The Father respects your mental power and allows you to use it exactly as you wish, regardless of the consequences. This insight liberates us from one of the most crippling misconceptions in conventional religion: the idea that God micromanages human affairs, alternately rewarding and punishing us into proper behavior. The reality is far more empowering. The divine principle responds to your consciousness with mathematical precision, but never overrides your freedom to choose that consciousness. Your free will is absolutely sacrosanct. When you choose thoughts of separation, limitation, fear, or judgment, the principle doesn't punish you. It simply allows those thoughts to manifest their natural consequences in your experience. When you choose thoughts of unity, abundance, love, and truth, the principle responds with corresponding manifestations. In both cases, your freedom remains intact. You are always free to think what you choose, and the principle always responds with exact precision to what you've chosen. Now I want to go even deeper into another revolutionary parable that completely transforms how we understand spiritual practice in daily life. The parable of the Good Samaritan reveals that love is not what most people think it is, not an occasional feeling of warmth, not an emotional indulgence, not even a religious duty. Rather, love is a practical law of correct thinking that manifests in concrete daily behavior. This distinction is crucial because many seekers mistake spiritual emotions for spiritual consciousness. They believe that occasional feelings of connection during meditation or worship constitute spiritual development. But Jesus teaches something far more revolutionary. True spirituality is measured by how you respond to the wounded aspects of life that you encounter on your path. The priest and Levite in the parable, representing religious knowledge and ritual observance, pass by the wounded man. This isn't incidental. It's a deliberate revelation that spiritual knowledge without practical application remains barren. You can study metaphysics for decades, attend countless workshops, and memorize spiritual texts, but if that understanding doesn't translate into practical compassion, it remains theoretical rather than transformational. The Samaritan, considered religiously unorthodox by Jesus' audience, demonstrates that correct spiritual thinking naturally manifests as practical action. He doesn't just feel compassion. He stops, bandages wounds, transports the man to safety, and ensures his ongoing care. This represents the mind that doesn't just affirm spiritual principles, but embodies them through concrete decisions and actions. If you've noticed in your own journey how true spiritual growth manifests not just in elevated feelings or insights, but in practical changes to how you respond to life's challenges, share that realization by typing "practical spirituality" in the comments. The transformation that matters isn't just what you think about God, but how you treat the wounded traveler on your path. Now, I want to explore one of Jesus' most misunderstood yet revolutionary teachings, the parable of the unfaithful steward, which reveals the fundamental creative principle behind all manifestation. This parable teaches an absolute metaphysical law. Thought creates all form, without exception. Every visible condition in your current life, your health, your relationships, your financial situation, your living environment, is the direct result of thoughts you've previously held, nurtured, and repeated in your mind. This isn't a religious belief or a philosophical position. It's a description of how consciousness functions. Your thoughts are not passive reflections of reality. They're the active, creative force that shapes reality. Just as a projector casts images onto a screen, your consciousness projects its contents into your experience. Nothing appears in your life that hasn't first existed as a pattern in your mind, either consciously chosen or unconsciously accepted. The unfaithful steward in this parable represents the human mind that has misused its creative power, directing it toward fear, limitation, and separation, rather than toward truth, abundance, and wholeness. When the steward realizes he will be called to account, he takes immediate action to change the conditions he's created. This represents the awakening mind that recognizes its responsibility for its circumstances and begins redirecting its creative power more wisely. What makes this teaching so revolutionary is that it completely transforms how you relate to your life conditions. Nothing is happening to you, everything is happening through you and because of you. You're not a victim of circumstances, but a creator of conditions. This doesn't mean you should blame yourself for challenges. It means you should recognize your power to transform them through changed consciousness. Every thought you entertain is like a seed planted in the fertile soil of universal mind. That seed must grow and produce after its kind, not as punishment or reward, but as the natural expression of mental law. Thoughts of lack produce experiences of limitation. Thoughts of conflict manifest as disharmony. Thoughts of unworthiness create situations that reflect that belief back to you. But the opposite is equally true. Thoughts of abundance, harmony, and value produce corresponding conditions. I want to go even deeper by examining another profound parable that reveals why so many people misuse this creative power without realizing it. The rich fool parable shows that when not educated in truth, human thought naturally tends to build security on the visible, believing that accumulation means protection and associating abundance with material possession. The rich man in this parable isn't condemned for being wealthy, but for misunderstanding the nature of true security. He believes that by building bigger barns and accumulating more possessions, he can ensure his soul's peace and well-being. This represents the consciousness that confuses effects with causes, that believes external conditions can provide what only internal alignment with truth can offer. This misperception is so common because it's reinforced by everything in our culture. We're taught from earliest childhood that security comes from having money, having status, having possessions, having achievements. But Jesus reveals the hidden truth. Genuine security comes only from being, from recognizing your divine nature that transcends all external circumstances. If you've experienced the transformation that comes from shifting your sense of security from external possessions to internal spiritual awareness, share that breakthrough by typing "inner security" in the comments. This shift from having to being may be the most revolutionary journey possible in human consciousness. Now, I want to reveal one of the most illuminating parables about why spiritual awakening seems accessible to some and elusive to others. The parable of the wedding feast shows that the kingdom, that state of divine consciousness and abundant living, is always available to everyone. It's not restricted, not hidden away, not reserved for a spiritual elite. The invitation has been sent. The table is set. The celebration is ongoing. Yet not everyone experiences this reality, not because God closes the door, but because the human mind is busy, distracted, or not properly dressed for the occasion. Think about the profound metaphysical insight this offers. The feast of spiritual abundance isn't happening somewhere else or sometime later. It's happening right now, but many decline the invitation, not through outright rejection, but through preoccupation with lesser concerns. Some are absorbed in their businesses, others in their fields, representing the mind captivated by material pursuits and practical affairs to the exclusion of spiritual awareness. They don't actively oppose the kingdom. They simply prioritize the visible over the invisible, the immediate over the eternal. This isn't about moral judgment, but about mental focus and receptivity. The universe can only give you what your consciousness is prepared to receive. If your attention is completely absorbed in material concerns, even legitimate ones, you create no space for spiritual revelation. This explains why some people can study spiritual teachings for years without transformation, while others experience profound awakening with minimal exposure. The difference isn't in the teaching, but in the receptivity of consciousness. Even more revealing is the man who comes to the feast without a wedding garment. He represents consciousness that wants spiritual benefits without spiritual alignment, that seeks the kingdom's abundance without adopting the kingdom's nature. The wedding garment symbolizes the consciousness of love, truth, and oneness that is the very essence of the kingdom. Without this alignment, you might physically enter spiritual environments, you might intellectually understand spiritual concepts, but you cannot truly experience the kingdom reality. This insight transforms spiritual practice from searching for something external to preparing your consciousness to receive what's already present. The kingdom isn't hidden from you, it's hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to adjust your mental frequency to its reality. The work isn't about finding the feast, but about cultivating the consciousness that can participate in it. Let me go deeper into what represents the culmination of all spiritual teaching, the Dragnet parable. This profound teaching reveals the final sorting of thoughts that must occur in the awakened mind. The parable describes a net that gathers fish of every kind, followed by fishermen separating the good from the bad. This represents the inevitable process of mental discrimination that follows spiritual awakening. Once you've glimpsed the kingdom, once you've experienced your divine nature directly, you cannot continue living as if that revelation didn't exist. You can no longer allow just any thought to inhabit your consciousness. You must become selective, discerning which thoughts align with your spiritual understanding and which contradict it. This isn't about perfection, it's about conscious choice and spiritual integrity. Think about this revolutionary insight. Awakening isn't the end of spiritual work, but the beginning of spiritual responsibility. Before awakening, you might think anything, believe anything, react in any way, simply following mental habits unconsciously acquired. But after awakening, consciousness demands congruence. You cannot affirm oneness and practice division, cannot declare abundance and live in scarcity consciousness, cannot proclaim love and harbor judgment. If you've experienced this imperative toward greater mental congruence after spiritual insights, this inner demand to align your thinking more consistently with your highest understanding, share that journey by typing conscious alignment in the comments. This process of sorting is not restriction, but liberation. The conscious creation of a mental environment that can sustain your spiritual awareness. As we come to this moment of reflection, I want to acknowledge something profound. If you've journeyed with me all the way to this point, it's not by accident. The fact that these teachings have resonated with you suggests that something within you is already awakening, already recognizing truths that your soul has always known. These parables aren't just ancient stories, they're mirrors reflecting the journey of consciousness that you yourself are undertaking. If you found value in this deeper exploration of what Jesus was really teaching, I'd love for you to become part of our community by subscribing to this channel. We're creating a space for those who are ready to move beyond surface-level spirituality into the transformative science of consciousness that these parables actually represent. The conversation we've started here doesn't end with this video. It's just the beginning of recognizing how these spiritual technologies can transform your experience from the inside out. If this message found its way to your heart, simply type "Awakening Now" in the comments. I read every comment, and it helps me understand which teachings are most needed in our community. That like button isn't just a metric for me. It's a way of helping these teachings reach others who are also ready for this level of spiritual understanding. Each like expands the reach of these consciousness-transforming insights to someone who might be exactly where you were before discovering this perspective. I've created a video that takes these principles even deeper, exploring how to practically apply this metaphysical understanding in your daily life, especially when facing challenges. It's waiting for you right here. Click and continue this journey of awakening with me there, because the kingdom is not something distant. It's unfolding within you right now, in this very moment.